All right, it is. It is. All right, here we go. It is all right. Working. Sorry, everything is going whack here today. All right. It looks like we're good to go now. Well, let's try this again. It's Thursday, September 26, 2024, and you're watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. And I'm your host, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem. Happy to be with you today. I cover Asian MMA pretty broadly across the whole, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian part of the world. And happy to be with you today. I'm the angle is a little bit different because for some reason my some software is not working correctly, so I'm going right through my computer. But we're good. So yeah, apologies. The last couple weeks I've been out of the saddle. It was like 2 weeks ago. I had an extremely intense week of work, one of the most intense that I've had, and I was working at a couple at some events that were going on throughout the week, and then directly the morning after, it basically came to my attention that one of my relatives, grandparent, was about to pass. So um, that week, and then the week after, I just kind of had to take off, partially because I like literally couldn't make it. And then I got really sick the weekend in between. And so, but we're back on here. And in some ways, I've been a lot out of the grid in terms of MMA. This is probably the least that I've been plugged into the news in the last 3 years, but kind of working my way back into it. But yeah, so today, gosh, what is there even to talk about? A lot. The center of Asian MMA, at least the last week, has been Macau. We've got a Ryzen show this weekend that's going down in Japan, but a lot of big fights announced for Macau. So I really love to focus kind of on the Chinese side of things and seeing this kind of this collection of athletes rising, improving their skills in one of the most populated countries in the whole world. And so I'm really interested to watch events like Happy Elephant on October 12th, like UFC Macau on November 23rd, which is going to have the Road to UFC finals. So we got a lot of those fights announced just in the last 48 hours. So I'll kind of cover those. So let's check out Happy Elephant, which is not an organization that a lot of you are probably familiar with, but this is, and the reason why I'm spotlighting this event, they've had several events in the last year or two, but this event, among others, is particularly noteworthy because it's going down in the same arena as the UFC show on November 23rd at the Galaxy Arena in Macau. So, watch to see if Macau kind of emerges as a new, not only Chinese, but also Southeast Asian, even broader Asian, if it becomes kind of a hub of Asian MMA. That's something I'm really curious about, kind of become the Vegas of Asia, at least in an MMA sense. It's kind of been the Vegas of Asia in a broader sense of the casino industry. But I think it's really interesting that Happy Elephant is going to this arena because it's a big arena. And I think this is the first MMA event to take place at the Galaxy Arena. But I just added these fights to Tapology yesterday, a lot of the bigger fights. So it looks like the main event for this Happy Elephant event is going to be Lyoto versus Ivan. Gosh, good luck there. Gnizditsky is my best attempt there of Russia. So why is this the main event? Well, last month when I was in Las Vegas for the Road to UFC semifinals, I chatted with a fellow UFC staffer that is, actually, he doesn't work directly for the UFC, but he's deeply involved with Chinese MMA. Friend of mine named Victor, and we were talking about potential future UFC champions out of China. And one of the top guys, one of his top three, was this 2-0 light heavyweight named Lyoto. Why, you say? Well, Lyoto, 28-year-old light heavyweight. You'll see his record. He's just got 2 MMA fights, but he is deeply entrenched in kickboxing. And in fact, he's won a lot of accolades recently. You see, there's a lot of knockouts and a lot of wins recently. He won the I don't know why he lost the belt there. It might have been a weight kind of thing, but he basically won this K1 tournament and has kind of risen to the top of the Chinese kickboxing scene. And he's going back and forth between MMA. He is training at the UFC PI, and a lot of folks are really excited about this guy, that he could quickly rise through the UFC. I mean, similar pattern of like a Wang Zong, but a male light heavyweight version of that, I think is a good comparison, except he's even younger. He's only 28 years old. And we know for light heavyweight, 28 is pretty young. So I'm sure this guy is on a similar track to the UFC as Wang Zong is. So this is a good step. Main event, big show in Macau. Don't know much, obviously, about this guy that he's fighting. But you've also got Lee Kai-Win on the card, fighting against Kim Min-woo out of Korea. You've got Tai Laka on there against Alison Barbosa. I don't foresee Tai Laka's role through the regional competition ending anytime soon. So I think that's going to keep going. But gosh, Tai Laka, I mean, talk about some of the biggest names in Chinese MMA outside of the UFC right now. Not just talent wise, but also in star power or potential star power. Definitely these guys. Lee Kai-Win, I think he's got a lot of those it factors. As long as he doesn't freeze up in his fights, he's got a lot of great attributes that could really endear him to fans. Tai Laka already has a quickly growing legion of fans as well, especially on his Douyin, his Chinese social media. And then Lyoto, he's got that kickboxing shine as well, already really well accomplished in China. So you got 3 fighters right at the top there that I think if you're gonna try to fill an 18,000 seat arena in China, these are 3 of the fighters. I think they've built this card really well, gotten a lot of great fighters in on there. Another interesting fight there between Zhang Yong and Reihan Lula. You've got Huang Fei R against Li Yishun, and I actually think that this is a pretty well-matched fight. There's not a lot of fights for women in China, especially against each other, that I feel like either haven't happened or are well-matched. But I think that this is a really great fight. Li Yishun is kind of been slowly rising, fighting a lot of lower-level competition through JCK, and they're giving I think this is a great fight for both. Huang Fei R, I think, has been needing a little bit of a step back, a little bit of a rebuilding time, whereas Li Yishun has shown a lot of good things, and this will be a test to see kind of where she's at. So I think this is a really well-matched fight. It could be too much too soon for Li Yishun, but she's shown some really cool stuff on the ground, some great submissions. So I love this fight here. Hailai Wusamo against Truk Nguyen. Very sneakily and very quietly, Truk Nguyen has become one of the top women's prospects in all of Asia. She's been fighting pretty much entirely in Lion Championship, which is a Vietnam exclusive promotion, but she's won the belt there. And, definitely outgrown that promotion, ready for something bigger. So Hailai is a young fighter that trains under Buho Yoga, former JCK flyweight champion. And I think this will help get Truquin some exposure that she's needed, breaking out of just the Vietnam circle, which is a very small circle, not well known outside of her home country. So I really love that they chose her. And then, you got Arigo La on there. Always a ton of fun fighting Kengo Fujimura. And then opening up the card, you've got Pham Van Nam, 6-0 flyweight out of Vietnam. And I can't say I'm too familiar with this guy. 32-year-old flyweight fighting out of Saigon Sports Club. But he's fought in Lion Championship. He fought for One Friday Fights and undefeated, coming off of 3 straight finishes. So could definitely be a fighter out of Vietnam very slowly is producing some really solid fighters. I think just now, like homegrown fighters. In the past, it's kind of been like Vietnamese fighters that are traveling around the world, thinking about An Tuen Ho training in the States, Quang Le also training in the States. But perhaps we're starting to get some homegrown Vietnamese fighters finally start to break out of the bubble of Vietnam. So very cool. Love how they built this card. There's fighters from all around Asia, Korea, China, Japan, India, Vietnam. You got to hand it to Happy Elephant. They've done a great job. I don't know if they'll be able to, how well they'll be able to fill this arena, but as much as you could, given their options of talent outside the UFC, even outside of fighters locked into your JCKs and your WLFs, they've done an excellent job. So looking forward to this a lot. The other event, a lot of fights that were announced recently, just in the last couple days, are the Macau fights for China or for the UFC. So this will just be 5 weeks after the Happy Elephant card, same place, and very interesting stuff going on, especially with this main event. I was expecting, and I hadn't heard anything official on this. And to be honest, again, like I've been out of the loop in more ways than one the last couple weeks, so I haven't really heard. I haven't been talking to many people, honestly, on the MMA front about what was going on. I was expecting what I expected out of this main event was going to be Song Yadong versus Davison Figueiredo. And I'm guessing the fact that we're getting Petr Yan against Figueiredo and that we haven't had another fight announced for Song Yadong, I'm guessing there's something on Song's end, either an injury or something else, some other reason that he is not able to make this event. So I don't know that for sure, but you got to think, if you're going to make a fight night show, you're going to like, people are like, man, why couldn't the UFC find a fight for this fighter? And I don't know that it's necessarily about finding a fight. Like, you got to think like, okay, if Li Jingliang isn't on this card, if Song Yadong is not on this card, most likely it may not have been we couldn't find an opponent, because we've seen like Song was gonna be the main event of that Shanghai show last year, and they went like down the line all the way to Chris Gutierrez, which like was not their first or second or third choice, but they still made it. So it's like they can find an opponent for Song if someone was unavailable. I was expecting Figueiredo versus Song. It made a lot of sense. I think I heard someone in the know at one point saying that was a possibility. So it's got to be something, I'm guessing, on Song's end that we're not getting the fight. It's always a little bit weird when you go to somewhere like China and you have a lot of fighters from that country on your roster, but the main event is totally geographically disconnected from that area. And so, I was like, they're probably not going to put Zhang Weili as the main event. They're probably, probably like your candidates are Song Yadong, maybe Yan Xiaonan. She did just co-main event UFC 300, so I thought that could be a possibility. Aside from that, it's like, yeah, they're probably not going to do Li Jingyong in the main event. There's really no other Chinese fighters that they would put there. If not that, then they, there's not, at this time, there's not a lot of Korean fighters. I'm guessing they're probably not going to want to do like, there's always, could they put like Tetsuro Taira against Brendan Royval there? I don't know if that would have really been the right fight for Macau. Even as I would love to see Tetsuro Taira get out of the Apex. He's been there way too much. But yeah, it's like you don't really go to China and put a Japanese fighter in the main event. That's, I think, probably a good call. So all that to say, what they're left with is getting two international fighters and putting them against each other. This is an amazing fight. Yan versus Figueiredo, I think, could decide a number one contender for bantamweight. Figueiredo, I always thought that he was probably just a few wins away, probably like 2 wins away from a title shot at bantamweight. And he's already made a big splash at the division. And he's already beat Rob Font, Cody Garbrandt, and Marlon Vera. And so you got to think, if you beat Petr Yan, like those are 3 out of the 4 of those guys are ranked. Cody Garbrandt, former champion. So honestly, even if you're not a former champion in another division like Figueiredo, just the merit of that should get you to a title shot, I think. And meanwhile, Petr Yan, he recently got back on track against Song Yadong. Had a great fight that was a great fight against Song. And against Davison Figueiredo, he could be the number one contender. So, so that's really interesting. Of course, you still probably Umar Nurmagomedov. He's still going to be your next fight at bantamweight, but I'm guessing, let's see, they last fought in last month or just a couple weeks ago, that bantamweight belt. So depending on when Merab wants to get back in there, I don't know, February or so, I feel like that would be a normal turnaround, February or March. It could be, you could see these guys, I hate that we call fighters a backup, but winner of this fight could be a backup, could be, or even a number one contender if Umar can't make it. So I think it's a great fight. I would probably lean slightly towards Figueiredo in this fight. I think that he's a bad matchup for a lot of people. He's a well-rounded guy. He hits really hard, and he's got good grappling, pretty good takedown defense, and I think that he could. So this is 5 rounds. It makes it a little bit harder. It's an excellent fight, guys. Really good fight. I could definitely see Yan. He started really well against Song. That's what surprised me, is he was a faster start than usual. So, it was actually Song that was starting a little bit faster, and Yan picked up speed. So you could see. Sorry, I got that flipped around in my head. So you could see Yan kind of picking up the pace later in the fight. It's a hard fight to pick. It comes down to a lot of the minutia and the X's and O's. I don't feel like there's a clear, in my mind, in my trained, semi-untrained mind, there's not a clear fighter that stands out to me without getting into the weeds of how each guy fights. So I love the fight. Should be an excellent main event. Yan Xiaonan versus Tabitha Ricci. I really like this matchmaking as well. It's a pretty big step down in the rankings for Yan. She just fought for the belt. I've heard some people say that this is not quite a tune-up fight for her, but it is definitely, like, it's a big step up for Ricci. Ricci is starting to come along with her striking a little bit, but still has a lot of work. Her grappling is really where she shines, but she's been coming together. I mean, She stumbled in her UFC debut against Manon Fiorot. Has only lost a split decision to Lupita Godinez, and I think you look at some of her recent, all of her recent wins, kind of come against that first guard of strawweights. Jessica Penne, Tisha Pennington Torres, Angela Hill, all of those were on that original season of Ultimate Fighter, introducing the strawweights. So, yeah, I think it's great that they're kind of bringing her up into the upper echelons of the strawweight division, seeing how she fares. I think that's really interesting. I feel like I would lean a little bit towards Yan in this fight. Just I think that obviously her striking is a lot more polished, and I think definitely more well rounded, used to the high pressure of a big fight like this. So, but who knows? I mean, Ricci's been on an upward trajectory. I'm really interested in that fight as well. Then you got your Road to UFC semis. I'm guessing those are going to be on the prelims. A lot of good stuff there. I think I don't know. I don't remember if I've touched on those, but I definitely will in the future. They also announced Song Kanan versus Muslim Salikov. Really fun fight. Really, I feel like this is a big step up for Song. I feel like he's kind of been in a tough alternating spot, and I think Muslim Salikov, he's an amazing fighter. He's getting pretty old, but at least for fighting standards. But yeah, I mean, Muslim Salikov, he's a Sonda guy. It's a no-brainer to bring him to China. He's got an extensive Sonda background, competed in China a lot, and even the nickname King of Kung Fu. He's a natural fit to bring to China. I love that they did that. Volkan Oezdemir versus Carlos Ulberg is a sick fight. Definitely feels like someone's going to get knocked out in that fight. Ulberg, also someone that's fought in China, so there's a little bit of story there. I've actually dug up his 10-1 record. I actually found, as I was going through old fights, I found old fights of his that weren't recorded and have added them on there. So like at WKG, I believe that was that fight. And so he's fought in China as well. He, gosh, it's crazy his rise. I mean, you look at these last, he's on a 6-fight win streak, and only one of those has gone to decision. He's got 5 straight finishes. Geez, 4 in the first round. What a killer. And Volkan Oezdemir recently got back on track as well. He's fought for a belt. Not just back on track, but he's on a 2-fight win streak. Kind of back to his old ways. That was really fun. Like, he went on this really, man, that was so fun when he was coming up and just had a bunch of first-round knockouts. Then he got fast-tracked to the title, got out-wrestled by Daniel Cormier, and then kind of struggled a little bit, but he is back on track now. Let's see if he can outdo that and find his way back to a 3-fight win streak. He's such a fun fighter at light heavyweight. Both these guys are. I love that fight as well. We got Carlos Hernandez versus Naim Jargal to Mendenbarrel. That fight was announced a while ago by CC Legaspi. Zhang Mingyang versus Ozzy Diaz. I think that's that fight is a fight that is kind of set up for Zhang to shine. Wang Tsong versus Gabriela Fernandez, kind of similar situation there. And then Lonar Kavanagh versus Jose Ochoa. That should be a ton of fun too. Talking to CC Legaspi, after Road to UFC, he was really hyping up Jose Ochoa to me. So, and I love that they put Lonar Kavanagh on there. I'm always interested to see how he's received among Chinese fans. I mean, the guy is ethnically half Chinese. So, yeah, curious to see what kind of reception he gets in China. That's 12 fights. There should be, I think if they're going to fill out the card, there's room for at least one more fight on the card. So we could get another one, but overall, like, I was hoping for just a little bit more out of the star power from this event. I would have loved at least, I mean, there's a lot of great fights on the card. I feel like from an entertainment standpoint, there's not a single fight on that card that I'm like, this maybe the Jan versus Ricci fight is the only fight that I'm like, all these fights are just action packed. I mean, you could go into some of the road to UFC fights and some of those, I'd have to think about some of those a little bit more, but all the UFC fights that were announced over the last week, all the ones outside of the road to UFC are just all of them sick fights, action, lots of action fighters, lots of knockout artists. So I think it should be great use of your time, even though it's going to be really early if you're in the US. I think I did see that the event starts at 1 a.m. here in the Pacific, 4 a.m. in the East, which originally they had it listed starting at midnight. So, hey, I'll take all the sleep, extra sleep you can give me there. So really looking forward to that event. There's a lot more we could talk about, but I'm just going to turn it over to you all, see what we got. Yeah, let's see what you got. You can drop your questions throughout the chat. Keep it kind and civil. Appreciate that. But let's get into it. All right, James, you're kicking us off here. If you make content or analysis, is it fair game for criticism? If you post something, are all comments fair game? I mean, the rules are yes. There's what the rules are of just the internet. The rules are yes. Is it fair game for criticism? I mean, yes. If you're the kind of person that really, if you cannot take criticism, like, if you don't know what to do with like criticism from people that you don't know, that's really mean or even incorrect, then you probably shouldn't be posting things online, and that's okay. Not everyone needs to. That's not like a virtue that everyone should strive for. I think most of us in our lives, like most people, work in an office and you're accountable to your management. You're in some ways accountable to your coworkers. You're accountable to the people around you, but most of us are not like accountable and open to criticism from people that we don't know. And so if you're posting things online, you need to like understand that you're opening yourself up to that. Ideally, people would treat each other the way that they would if they were in person. So today I heard someone say that the internet is mundane, but real life is where it's really at. And unfortunately, a lot of people live their lives more online than they do in real life with other people, excluding what our various jobs demand from us. But unfortunately, the way that it is that we feel a lot more liberty to disparage people online and treat them differently than we would in person. So I think, sometimes I try to think through, like, even if I'm sending someone a nice comment or a message, I sometimes just imagine them next to me, and just imagining, if I was sitting next to this person, would that change how I communicate with them? And these are things that we were never, like, you don't learn online etiquette in a school. You learn some like business etiquette, but you don't really learn like these are ways to responsibly conduct yourself as a human on the internet with strangers. So, and there's a lot of ways at which, like, I don't like, I have some fences even around myself online. There's like, you guys know, there's a lot of things I don't engage with online, certain discussions that I don't get into, certain platforms that I won't engage with, and a lot of limits that I've put through my settings online to try to slow the drip of just like being around just a harsh world. Because I don't care who you are, like, I don't think there's anyone that can just slog through the the hellhole that is social media, or that it can be, all day long and not come out unscathed, not come out more of a unpleasant kind of person. That does shape and form you in some way. Um, so in that way, I think it's good to make some fences around yourself, but you have to be secure in yourself, and you need to have a life outside of social media and the internet that you feel comfortable with. And you need to have a social circle and people that actually know you, that can affirm you. And their opinion needs to be bigger. So bigger than, people online. But that's not to say that there isn't sometimes valuable, valid criticism that people that you haven't met in person can give you. It's just like, I don't think it's wise to just open up the floodgates and just like live your life slogging through comment sections. So the next question I see is asking about is the Elon Musk app failing? It seems like freedom of speech in MMA terms is just about being as racist as possible with a blue tick mark. Well, I mean, that the label of freedom of speech on Twitter X, it's all just branding, but it's not actually true. There is so many limits on freedom of speech on this app. Just last week, if you haven't been following what's been going on with Elon Musk, X in Brazil banned X in their country because X would not appoint like a legal representative for the country in Brazil. They also would not moderate certain levels of disinformation. And so they closed down the app in the country. Tons of users flocked to Blue Sky, a sort of text-based, more or less Twitter X alternative. Saw just like a 300% growth when that happened in their user base because people were leaving the app. So I don't know if that can ever be recovered. There's probably some irreparable damage done, but Twitter X actually reversed course, and they basically conceded to all of Brazil's demands with the hopes of being back on in Brazil. I don't know if that has actually reached that point where they're active again, but they've basically said like, okay, fine, we will put some limits on speech to combat disinformation in Brazil. And it's been the same way with other countries as well. Now, typically those countries tend to be the countries that Elon Musk has shooken hands with in the past has been countries that are more politically right-leaning. Brazil their government currently is more or less more left-leaning. I don't know much about Brazilian politics at all, so that's as far as I know. But at least I know their president Lula is left-leaning. Some of the courts that had gotten in trouble. So it's mainly Elon Musk has had trouble with left-leaning political authorities because he's more than willing to compromise free speech for the sake of other, like Turkey. He's already taken, and then India. There was a documentary that reveals some less than flattering perspectives on Narendra Modi and the government there, who is a little more right-leaning, and the government asked X to basically take down any links to this documentary, which they obliged to. So there's the freedom of speech thing it's all just smoke. And I don't know if the app is going to like literally fail, but I haven't seen any, I've seen literally nothing but L's and just like it sinking into the ground. And as this happens, it only becomes like, you think about like Telegram and Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media platform, how those are really just, they've pretty much just become message boards for people on the right or far right to converse with each other. And that's more or less what X is becoming. More and more, it's leaving the the top three whatever social media apps that if you go to a website, you'll see the links at the bottom. More or less, it's leaving that. I'm starting to hear of websites that are taking that logo off of their page. I mean, there's been lots of news outlets a long time ago that deleted their X accounts, but even but that hasn't stopped or slowed. I mean, that's still happening. And there was an initial departure of a lot of journalists, companies, brands that were leaving the platform kind of within those first 3 months, that were going to Threads or other federated social media apps like Mastodon. I don't know how those apps are doing. I hear that Blue Sky is growing quite a bit, but I don't see any sign of it reversing. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with the app if they're going to like put it up for sale and someone's going to buy it and basically make all the changes necessary. If they're just going to change their philosophy over and over, if they're just going to keep laying people off and replacing the, I don't know what's going to transpire with the app if they, but I don't think that the app overall is going to die. A lot has to happen for that. Like, apps never really die unless you're like if you think about in the last 15 years, which social media apps have died. Vine died, which I don't even fully know the full story of why that died. If that had anything to do with like monetization or a user base, but Vine left us. And then I think about just like a lot of side projects from bigger social media conglomerates like Google Circles. That was a thing for a little bit. Maybe Facebook has had some various things, projects that have died, but there's really not a lot of social media apps that have died as a whole. They just keep changing. And but I mean, social media, I mean, in the long-term history of social media, it's still very, very new. The first social media was probably like 2004. So we're 20 years into the social media experiment. Probably a little bit before that. I guess blogging would be the first kind of social media. And then it was Zanga, then it was MySpace, and then Facebook kind of opened the door for a lot of other things, kind of in junction with the smartphone. But yeah, you're asking about if freedom of speech in MMA terms is just about being as racist as possible with a blue check mark. I mean, yeah, I don't think that unbridled freedom of speech is the best way to go. I think that freedom of speech it's both a government policy, but it's very different from a philosophy. So freedom of speech in the government sense, again, is the government cannot penalize you for what you say, but even that does have a few limits of like, it directly endangering people. So even with the governmental sense, it's not unbridled free speech. But then there's a whole different category of like, we should have the freedom to say whatever we want, wherever we want, on every single platform. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think that as a business, as a company, like I don't think that is like you can find advertisers for that. You can find other brands that share those values, but there are almost all the biggest suppliers of advertising dollars, really none of them believe in free speech, unbridled free speech. So you're not going to get, you're not going to get Disney, or you're not going to get Kraft. You're not going to get the NFL. A lot of the big stuff. I mean, and most corporate, most big companies have policies limiting free speech as well. So trying to make that your brand, you're going to pigeonhole pigeonhole yourself into a certain kind of right wing or far right ideology that is adamant that unbridled free speech is the way to go. And we've already seen, I've already said that that X is not even that. It's not even that. I don't even, is True Social that? I don't know. I've never been there. Is Telegram that? I don't know. It seems like even claims of that are more of like, it still panders to the right rather than to the left. So there's even limits on that. It's all branding. It's all an illusion. So, yeah, tread through the Elon Musk app at your own risk is all I can say. Do I feel that you meet people in the MMA community that do not realize how smart they are? A lot of us here understand our limits with knowledge, whereas certain people online are just adamant that they know what they're talking about. And does that interaction ever get exhausting? I mean, I'm never really someone that like spars with people online. So, oh, and you said that do not realize how not smart they are. I mean, no one can be an expert in everything, right? No one can be an expert in everything. And there's a lot of folks, there are people in MMA, the spaces that I think are actually smarter than they realize, or I think have a really bright future ahead of them. And I try to, like the general rule that I try to follow, whether, no matter what media it is that I try to be around, I try not to surround myself with voices of things that I am against. I try to have more voices around me that are like helpful in a positive way. And so, in general, like, again, I keep my circle pretty small of just a couple voices that are really, really helpful to me. And I drink deeply of that knowledge. But otherwise, I don't even like interact with a lot of you online more than just, and not because I have a principle against it, but just like I'm just not really someone, I don't instinctively, and people would say that I'm missing out on a lot of growth, but I don't instinctively like comment on other people's work a whole lot. I just I just like it and move on. So, but I don't like generate a lot of discussion, I guess. Like, and I never use, I also try to stay away from the algorithm. So usually what I see is what I follow. And so I mean, there are frustrating parts of being online, but I have to figure out a way to be able to stay online for the long term and not get burnt out. And so that means basically just kind of keeping my circle small. I asked before about how Burt MMA saying Suarez was told she was next for the title fight was news. Well, I was right that it wasn't news since Suarez versus Jandiroba was booked. If you want my opinion, the strawweight division deserves to be held up. All the fighters are all talk with no action. If Weili gets to fight with Val, I think that would be great because anything Weili does seem to make people angry anyways. So why not make more people angry? Yeah, so let's talk about that booking. Again, I've stayed out of I haven't really talked to a lot of people on the inside that much for the last couple of weeks. So I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. I felt like there was a clear number one contender at strawweight, and I felt like that was Suarez. What I'm guessing I don't know what happened behind the scenes. I was very shocked to see the Suarez versus Jandiroba fight. I feel like on the outset, that was probably the UFC's first choice. There must have been something, I'm guessing on the Weili side of things, that interrupted those plans because there were folks, including, I felt like Suarez was the clear number one contender. And if not her, it seemed like there was also a lot of folks that felt like Jandiroba should be next for the belt. And if they made that fight, I wouldn't fuss about it. So it felt like there were contenders. And so, I mean, for goodness sakes, like we gave Amanda Lamoshe a title fight. We gave Jan a title fight. Contenders that I felt like were just as deserving as a Suarez or a Jandiroba. So I was shocked to see that. I'm guessing that there's something on the Zhang side that interrupted that. I don't know if she's saying that she really, really wants to go up and fight for the 125-pound belt. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not, but if I'm just kind of putting the pieces together, I don't know what's holding up the division. And strawweight right now is not, in defense of what you're saying, I wouldn't say strawweight is like the healthiest division in the UFC. I think that it is a division that can afford to move a little more slowly than others. I think flyweight is not that division for women. So I would actually argue that absolutely the next fight at flyweight should be Shevchenko versus Manon Fiorot. I think Fiorot has done more than enough to solidify herself as the number one contender, even to the point to where she was the backup for Grasso Shevchenko 3. I think that it would be a disservice to her to put her on the sideline again. I even felt that it should have been Grasso versus Fiorot instead of Grasso versus Shevchenko 3. Obviously, Shevchenko proved me and any other doubters wrong that she was capable of winning the third time against Grasso. So I feel I in general prefer for divisions to move through contenders. When there's a situation like at strawweight, I've got my rankings pulled up. You've got Suarez and Jandiroba. The more I think about it, I'm actually not that upset that if Weili is going up to flyweight, like there's beyond Suarez and Jandiroba, there's not a whole lot of fighters that are coming up. And I think it could also shed some light on the matchmaking behind Ricci and Jan, because I feel like if like beyond Suarez and Jandiroba, it's pretty desolate below that. You're going to have fighters fighting in rematches. You've had a lot of fighters aging out and retiring from the division. So strawweight is in desperate need of turnover. So it's a division that I think you're right, could afford to just kind of let it sit and create some more contenders. And so, Suarez and Jandiroba, they're fighting for obviously the number one contender shot. And I'm guessing Weili is either going to fight at fight Shevchenko, or, I mean, who knows? Maybe she'll go up and fight another in a non-title fight at flyweight. We could see that. Imagine her against, Macy Barber. I guess there's options you could do at flyweight. I think flyweight is a very healthy, very strong division. Strawweight, not so much. So Tabitha Ricci fighting Yan Xiaonan, I think that's, and you saw this with middleweight. So think back to middleweight. There was a season, and we may still be in it, but where the UFC was matching up a lot of fighters at the bottom of the top 15, even way outside the rankings. They were matching them against fighters in the rankings, higher in the rankings, to try to force some turnover in the division, because Izzy had basically lapped the division. He was starting to lap it a second time. They desperately needed new contenders at middleweight. And now middleweight's a really healthy division, really exciting. There's been a lot of turnover at the top, and middleweight's doing fine. So project accomplished. There's still some young contenders kind of bursting their way up through the rankings at middleweight. That needs to happen at strawweight. So that's why they've matched Tabitha Ricci, who's ranked number 9, hasn't fought anyone, in that top 5 space. They're matching her against the number 2 Yan Xiaonan. hoping to maybe get a contender out of her. I imagine what you'll see. Strawweight's pretty booked up now that I'm looking at it. But I imagine you'll start to see a lot of other straw weights that are outside or lower in the ranks matched against higher ranked fighters like your Amanda Lemos, your Jessica Andrades, to try to get some fighters up there. So you're right. It's a tricky situation. You're right in that straw weight. It can afford to move a little bit more slowly. I hate that if Zhang is going to fight for the flyweight belt, that it's going to hold up a very active division with a clear number one contender that's already been sitting around for a little while. So, but that's just your cup of tea. Do you prefer for divisions to go through top contenders, or do you prefer to have more, cross champion kind of fights? So that's my opinion on that. Do I think the UFC will stay on ESPN? I think that they will. My guess is that they will split up their coverage between ESPN, Netflix, and maybe a third one. Probably Netflix and ESPN are your main two. But you could see, it wouldn't surprise me if there was like a left field kind of broadcast partner like Rumble, because your tiers of fights that the UFC broadcasts are your pay-per-views. Those are probably going to stay. I feel like with pay-per-view, it's really important. Consistency is so important for pay-per-views. So that one, I feel like will probably stay on ESPN, because you got to think ESPN really, really likes UFC staying on pay-per-view, and you want consistency with your pay-per-view. And so it's best to have it all in one place. I think they'll probably stay on ESPN for pay-per-view, but they'll probably have a couple tentpole kind of like, thinking about your UFC cards that are on the road. So your tiers are pay-per-views, fight night shows that are on the road, and then Apex cards, and then Contender Series, Tough, Road to UFC, which is typically on Fight Pass. So you could see Contender Series and maybe even Tough going one or two of those to like Rumble. I think that wouldn't be surprising to see kind of like a really out of left field third party, because I don't keep up with Slap, but at least for a while, I don't know if they still are, but Power Slap was on Rumble. So I think that audience really matches a lot of UFC's target audience. So it wouldn't surprise me if they threw a couple fights on there. Contender Series, I wouldn't be surprised. The idea was floated out there, and I really, really like it a lot, of taking Contender Series on the road. Guys, imagine this. Imagine Contender Series where instead of 5 fights each evening, we did 8 fights, and we took it on the road, and we went to smaller venues in the Northeast of the US. We went to the Southeast. We went to Denver. We went to Southern California, and maybe, Chicago, something like that. And, maybe one in England as well. You might have an international location, but if we had 8 of those events, or 8 fights per card, and 7 or 8 events per year instead of 10, man, that the idea that I think was floated was to maybe like take Contender Series on the road. So I think that would be a really good platform for kind of a third player for those rights. Unless ESPN really, I could also see it staying with ESPN, and then maybe like Tough going to Rumble. That would be another thing. But then I think you could maybe see some of the bigger fight night shows that are on the road. Like your UFC Tampa, UFC Nashville, those kind of events going to Netflix where they just stack the card with an amazing fight night show. That I think is what you're like. I don't think that you are going to see the biggest of the biggest. I think that's going to stay on ESPN. So we'll see if I'm right. But that's kind of how I see things shaking out. A few weeks ago, you said that sarcasm is bad for MMA, but you also said that it's important not to take MMA seriously. Isn't that a contradiction since sarcasm goes hand in hand with not taking things seriously? Well, there's different kinds of sarcasm, right? I'm sarcastic all the time with my buddies, and I have one group of friends that we are sarcastic all the time with each other. Even to the point of like mildly kind of roasting each other, but all these guys are also like have just like a lot of great character, probably some of the best people I know in the whole world. And we've literally talked about as a group of just like, hey, is our sarcasm ever going too far? Like if there's ever a moment where like you felt like sarcasm went into attack or kind of like crossed a line somewhere where you're like, really, it's gone from just like, I don't know, the lines are blurry, but you know what I mean? It's just like sarcasm can go too far to where like someone's feelings were actually hurt. Then we know we've crossed a line. And so I feel like sarcasm there's like a playful kind of sarcasm. And then there's a mean kind of sarcasm. And I think you just have to read the room. And I feel like whenever I create, and this is where like the whole like being in person versus online thing, it really shows the difference, because when you get hired, think about like if you get hired at a job, you're going through like your HR mandated training. Like you're not going to be, if you're a sarcastic person, you're going to know to filter that, or most of us know to filter that. And then as you get to know your coworkers, you can kind of, exercise a little bit more of your everyday sense of humor, at least where you feel it's appropriate. But you have to read the room. You have to read the room if people are going to be able to take your sarcasm well. And it's just because it's hard to do that online, people often just have no limits. And so it can often just get to just being unnecessarily critical and mean. And I think people acting like MMA is all that there is to the world. And so we have to attack each other and tear each other down to defend what we see as sacred, whether that's our favorite fighter or this or that. And so I think the sarcasm can get kind of mean, but I think sarcasm in a playful way where people are not directly attacked, I think that's like fine and brings a lot of fun to the sport. But yeah, no, good question. Untimely question this time. As you know, I'm a big fan of Drake Riggs, but he did something that rubbed me the wrong way a few weeks ago. When Michelle Watterson retired, Jack Slack posted a highlight reel of all her missed kicks, and Drake got super mad and said doing that was lame. I thought it was funny because Watterson's entire career is throwing kicks when she's too far out of range. Was Drake right to be mad, or was he overreacting? When is it right to make fun of a fighter's style when they're fighting or right after they retire? Yeah, I'm actually with Drake there. I feel like it's a little bit. I think when a fighter retires, it's like think about other situations outside of fighting. When someone reaches the end of a career, or gosh, even their life, it's like, so the most extreme example of this is not an exact comparison, but the most extreme example of this is like literally if someone dies, you're not going to talk about their L's at their funeral. Talking about someone's like character flaws and just, if someone, I think it's a little bit different if someone like was a sexual predator in their lifestyle. And I'm not saying you shouldn't talk about that after they die to like respect them, but like if someone just like wasn't very good at their job, then that's not like something you're not going to talk about that at their funeral. You may talk about that at the reception label, just like, yeah, like they struggled at their job, but it's a time to focus and celebrate on their positive attributes. And so like also thinking about like take it down a notch. If someone retires at your office, um, and at their retirement party, are you going to like, and your task was giving a speech, are you going to talk about the ways that they were incompetent at their job? Probably not. Like that's kind of a cultural taboo. And so I feel like it's like, okay, this fighter retires, and so it's like immediately we're showing ways that they weren't good at their job. It's like, okay, duh. There were areas, every fighter has weak areas, unless you're George St. Pierre. But every fighter has areas that they're weak and that you could focus on those things. But, it was like when Michelle Waterson retired, I didn't focus on like, well, man, but she never became a UFC champion. Or man, like she was never able to do this. It's like you can focus on those things exist, but like I feel like it's generally just like respectful to honor whatever legacy or achievements that fighter gave. So I do feel like that's insensitive to do, to just like immediately be like, hey, guess what, guys, this fighter sucked. It's just like, man, save it. We all know that she wasn't a perfect fighter, and we don't need reminding of that. And so I think Michelle Waterson, she comes off as like a really great ambassador of the sport. She did a lot of great things for women's MMA. And I was lucky to get to see her fight multiple times in person, both in the UFC and outside the UFC. And so I really got to see, like, I went to an Invicta event where she was the main event, and just like how the event centered around her, and she just carried she carried things so well and was such a winsome fighter, both like while fighting, but also outside of fighting. And so I don't know. I also have to like disclosing, like if I was like very candidly a fanboy, like I considered myself a Michelle Waterson fan even before I was in MMA media. Mostly just because my in-person experiences felt like she was a really great ambassador, a really just lovely personality. Was cool that she really kind of built her identity around her motherhood, all of that. There's a lot of cool things about Michelle Waterson. So I'm just like, if a fighter that I don't like retires, I don't even mind sharing what few positive attributes I could find about their career and sharing those. I would probably say, like, I think we're all aware of this fighter's shortcomings, and so I don't need to air those out. So no, I'm actually with Drake on that. When a reigning champion loses, what do you think of the current MMA culture where MMA pundits say that the losing champion was never good to begin with? Well, I think that the highest level of pundits don't actually say that. I think it's a little bit lower level of I think most of the time, I don't want to say 100% of the time, but I think most of the time people that are saying that are not, I would not say are like the highest level of analysts and media members. Why is it hard for people to understand that all fighters are human and there will be good days and bad days? Yeah. And also just overall changing. MMA as a whole is always changing. So a champion may have represented a certain era of MMA development, and then they just sort of they didn't keep up with that, or they aged out. Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes, perfect example of that. Ronda Rousey, and it was for the women's bantamweight division between UFC in 2012 and 2015. I mean, gosh, there was nobody better. Where women's MMA was at that time, she was a killer. She was the best. She was the best woman in the world at the time, but she did not keep up with the changing times. I mean, who's going to say that Hoist Gracie was never any good? Who's going to say that Matt Hughes was never any good? Even as they couldn't keep up with the George St. Pierres of the world, or the Hoist Gracie is not being able to keep up with the Matt Hugheses of the world. No, I think that there's MMA is just always evolving. And so anyone that reaches the championship level, I don't feel like there's ever been I mean, to my memory, like if you can make it to the UFC title shot level, you are a good fighter. Like, you may not be an all-time great, but like you are a good fighter, even if you get beat. Yeah, no, I don't really respect most of those opinions. Ghost taught me this rule a while back. If there's a fight you don't care about, then you shouldn't talk about it. DC, I don't care about Xiaonan fighting some girl down in the rankings. Fair enough. Young got more credit losing to Weili than Weili does when Weili beats someone. Again, all about expectation. I think I talked about that earlier. Hope Jan loses every fight for the rest of their career solely to how Weili has been criticized lately. Oh, I mean, that's not Jan's fault. You can't blame Jan for that. Sounds toxic, but people have been toxic to Weili. When fire can't be put out with water, it's time to use fire, right? Not necessarily. I don't know that. I like, again, that's what people say about Jan, and what people say about Weili is not any of Jan's business. She came there to fight. She fought the best fight that she could, and how people react to that, or how people react to Weili's performance or Weili's performance, is totally out of her control. So I don't think that she deserves any of that shade. I mean, you do you however you want to feel about that, but I don't know that that's going to like change any kind of perspective on it. I tend to just try to give respect to both fighters and then move on, for sure. Did I see Lynch's clip talking about the culture of clipping from interviews? He said it takes viewers away from the original interview if someone with a monetized account clips from the original. What are your thoughts on that situation? Yes. Thank you, James. Thank you, James Lynch. This is one of the reasons why it is so, this may be probably one of the top 3 reasons why MMA media is so unhealthy and why it is so hard for people to grow. Because one way to look at MMA media is that there are 2 different types of platforms. There are people that want to create their own content, generally create their own content. I mean, all of us borrow from each other in one way or another, whether that's just like even someone just saying, hey, according to this person, such and such fight taking place. All of us are borrowing from each other at some level. But more or less, there's people that are trying. Why they got into MMA media is because they want to contribute something new out of themselves, some kind of original content. And then there are collectors. There are people that just take everything from around the internet and put it into one place. And I'm not even arguing that that's a bad thing. I follow a couple of those accounts, but now that I think about it, all the accounts that I follow that put everything in one place, all of them actually contribute original things as well. I don't think I even follow any of these accounts that literally just like repost all the news from everywhere else. The closest example of that, other than like MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, but like, I mean, I follow Marcel Dorff, who, he posts all the fights that are happening in the UFC, but he also reports a lot of his own fights too. And then I also follow Burt MMA on Instagram, but he, I feel like he's always just like throwing the original stuff up on his story anyways. Also, Instagram doesn't really monetize that much, but I feel like he does it in a really respectful way. So I'm happy to follow him too. But yeah, it's a big problem because what happens is like if it is the average rank and file MMA fan, what is more appealing to more of them is to have one place or like two places where they can just get everything just piled on top of each other, all the gossip, all the rumors, all the official fight announcements, everything all in one place. And so those naturally are just going to grow much quicker. The algorithm favors it a lot better. They're also able to curate things to like really be like, okay, what are all the things that are like getting the most attention, and let's throw those onto our feed as well. So naturally those accounts are going to grow much faster. But the problem is that like creators like I create things, I also curate some things too, but like folks like myself, folks like James Lynch that are just like trying to actually create the content, we don't really have a desire to become the other thing. We don't have a desire to just like collect everything, put it together, and curate it. If there's an interview, you know, let's take the best 30-second clip and throw it in there for people's enjoyment. So the problem is that we're most of the time never just going to be able to grow as quickly as the other ones. And the way so there's collectors that do it tastefully, I think like Burt MMA, but then there's collectors that it's like, yeah, you technically did cite the original source, you did play by the rules, both like the rules of the social media platform and technically even the rules of media and journalism, where you did credit people, but they are really not benefiting at all, other than just getting their name out there. And maybe a slim few people will go back and actually follow James Lynch, look at the whole interview. But so it's creating this barrier where like and I'm not, if anyone has a lack of success growing in MMA media, I'm not here to solely blame it on this issue, but it does really, like I've definitely seen things that I've posted where people will create their own graphics and they will cite me, but their stuff gets a lot more traffic than me. And I realize that this happens. This is not just an MMA media thing. This happens all the time. I mean, not even in sports, but just if something big happens, the word gets out and people talk about it. And so I realize that you can't totally control this. It's just part of it. And especially for like really small accounts, I don't really pay much mind to them. Although who's to say those smaller accounts couldn't grow? So I think everyone should be held to the same standard. It's just I don't know how to change that, and I don't think that's ever going to change in MMA media. So the only thing that could change to make it better for the creators is for the platforms. Exactly what James Lynch said, is for the platforms to change. And he talked about YouTube. You know, it's really, I actually, you know, we've talked a lot about like DMCA, like how annoying it can be that you can't post things on Instagram or YouTube where you don't get like copyright strikes. And Instagram is not as good at it as YouTube is, but it's better at it than Twitter is. Because I'll post, if you notice, I used to post a bunch of highlights of fights that had just happened on my Instagram and even on my YouTube shorts, but I started getting like copyright strikes on those, so I stopped. And I kind of like, if you think about it from what James is saying, like the UFC, they are creating, if you just lump them in with all content creators, like they are creating content. And for me to post like a 20-second highlight of of a fight. Like, imagine if all I did for all UFC events was just post all the finishes, all the best moments of the fight. And then eventually there were people that were like, you know what? I don't even have to watch the UFC event. I can just go on Twitter. I can see all the best parts and save several hours of my time. That hurts the UFC because that means that people are not, I mean, I know I don't have the audience to make a meaningful impact, but just hypothetically, imagine if you were someone with, a couple 100,000 followers, like that would make a dent in the UFC's viewership, which in turn impacts their ad revenue. They're creating content and they are monetizing it. So if you look at it from that perspective, now there's a bigger conversation about fair use, of if you're like, what is a fair use is like you're adding commentary, you're changing the original intent. That's a whole different thing. But I do see the argument for me literally just like reposting a segment of a UFC fight, just being like, hey guys, this is cool. And there is a case for the UFC to be like, hey, you're literally just like posting that. Even if you're saying, hey, this is from the UFC, I don't own this, that doesn't matter, that you're still benefiting from it. And I did. There was a season of my Instagram life cycle that I was getting 350 new followers every day because of reels, just because of fight highlights. And it wasn't off of anything that I was creating, which is crazy. And I don't know if even if that option was still available, I don't know if I would still do that. But so this is, again, it's on the platforms. It's on Elon Musk. It's on Instagram to do it to a greater degree, that like, it's not enough just to say, hey, by the way, this is where it came from, but really like, the only way for you to be able to post a video is if you're posting the literal original video. And in some ways, like Twitter does this, like I do this on Twitter. Like I am really only going to repost something, or on my Instagram, I'm really only going to post a video if it's the original. So appreciate James for speaking up on that. I don't know how we get past this as creators. It kind of sucks. What is the correct way to behave as a fan of MMA? I mean, there are no rules, Should we interact unabashedly, yell our opinions at people, or should we not say anything? Well, there are no rules. It's back to the last question. It's on the platforms to set their own rules. Instagram has much better guidelines against bullying, against people, being annoying. And I honestly, on Instagram, I hardly interact with people that are unruly. But all I can say is what I wish the world was like. And I wish that everyone could be deeply passionate about the fighters and about the sport, while being able to also be able to go outside and touch grass, and also treat each other like human beings, and be mature about things and be kind to each other. But it's never going to happen. There are no rules in a sense, but what are you going to do? Follow-up question. Ghost said it was fair game because he doesn't do it in public, because people took the time to study something and just don't be an ass about it. I've seen someone make some good reads about MMA fighters and harshly say things about someone else's analysis, like he was on his high horse. I thought he was right, but it seemed like he was getting high off his own farts. So I don't know about being right and nice to people. Must be different things. I mean, be kind to people. If it's a relationship that you care about, seek to make things right where you are misunderstood. And if it's not a relationship that you care about maintaining, then just keep going. I've said things that have rubbed people the wrong way, that people thought were mean, that I didn't intend to be unkind and I thought was fair. But, there are other things at play. There was nationalistic pride at play. There was fighter loyalty at play. And if it's a relationship that I care about, then I reach out. But, and that's another thing of like, if people know your character too, then they will be able to interpret some of if something you say rubs them the wrong way, if they know your character, they know you, then it helps to color some of the criticism or like things that stand out to them. It helps to color that, which is another reason why if all you know about me is my online persona and all you know about me is what I tweet about fights, then you may not know how to interpret things that I say. If I say something about a fighter, you may interpret that as like, wow, this guy's really anti-fighter X. And I was like, no, I'm not anti-fighter X. That was just my opinion. And that's just how I see, how I'm interpreting the MMA world. But, a lot of things you can't control. What's the name of the app that is all in one social media that you were talking about during the last podcast? The one that connects a bunch of other apps. I think what you're talking about is, so I think what you're talking about is something called the Fediverse. Let me know if this isn't what you're thinking about, but the Fediverse is is hailed as the future of, even by Mark Zuckerberg, as the future of social media, where just like email, you can, there's an interconnected, decentralized server where messages that you create from one app will show up on another app, just like email has Gmail, has Yahoo Mail, Hotmail, lots of different providers. So Threads, the Facebook-owned text-based app, wants to be a part of that, where you can log on to Threads, and so the app is still whatever provider you have. So what Threads would be like is I would open Threads, but I would be able to see messages, posts, tweets, whatever, from Mastodon, from Blue Sky, so that your audience is not just limited to the users of that particular app, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Like, we have email, we have different web browsers. Why not have a text world? Now, in terms of moderation, there's definitely some interesting things around that, because okay, so what if I want to share a 10-minute long video on that app? What if I am just the most foul-mouthed, racist human being? Who's going to moderate that kind of those kind of interactions? There's some questions around that, but so I don't know. It's obviously not a reality yet, but it is really interesting for sure. Kareem Zidane often says where politics and sports intersect. They do. Why do I hear some people say that we need to keep politics and sports separate when they are connected? It's because the politics that they see coming into their sport are not the political perspectives that they agree with. That's all that means. When the politics that they fully align with come into their sport, no big deal. When politics seem to interrupt their fun, like when we complain about Saudi Arabia and partnering with governments that have assassinated journalists, when we talk about that, people are like, but we just want to watch the Anthony Joshua fight. We just want to watch Lionel Messi, who's an ambassador of Saudi Arabia. Like, we want to just enjoy these things without you like trying to take it away from us. But if you were if you were like really passionate about the way that journalists are treated, or you were, which humanely, if you were really passionate about people all around the world being treated humanely, then that might outweigh your need to be entertained. It's all just, what politics do I want in my sport? I want to see the political figureheads that I support. I like to see it when they're, enjoying the sport that I like. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's all smoke. Overhand Indonesia. Good to see you back. Hopefully you've been good after the breaks you needed. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Good to hear from you too, man. I've been off the grid for a little bit, honestly, almost since Road to UFC. I like took a breather after that, and then I've had a very intense September, but I'm actually in a period where I'm actually like taking like a mini retreat like every week, which has been fantastic. Last week I went to the coast for a day, just sat on the beach all day. A couple nights ago, I went out to Mount Hood, the beautiful mountain volcano near Portland, and I just camped there. Next week, I'm just gonna go. There's like a monastery nearby that I'm just gonna go stay overnight and just hang out at. So no, it's been good, and overall, I am doing really well. Overall, I'm doing great. I'm kind of in a season where I am realizing that it's important for me to slow down a little bit. So yeah, appreciate that, man. How do you think the next presidential election affects MMA in terms of MMA fighters getting into the country? Ooh, yeah, that's the question, isn't it? That is the question. I don't, as far as fighters getting into the country, I don't think it actually affects that a whole lot. I think like if we're talking about some of the like the Ramzan Kadyrov affiliated fighters, then which I don't think the list is actually that long of fighters, and some of them, it's hard to know what the actual status of everyone is, but I don't think the president will have a huge impact on that, because a lot of that has to do with like sanctions, and so I think the presidential election will have a bigger impact on some like overall structural things. Now, we did just see that, and I haven't even read any articles. I just saw the tweet that the UFC's come to another settlement in that case. But I think that is more likely what the next president of the United States could have a bigger effect of that, of like what judges they put in place. And, Trump appointed judges are generally not very union friendly or labor friendly. Whereas like, and like antitrust kind of stuff, I mean, gosh, Lena Khan has just been killing it, kicking ass, going after antitrust kind of stuff, which is honestly, that is really, I mean, this is a whole nother podcast, preserving the health of capitalism. If you really care about capitalism and competition, then, that's really like, and actually I was listening to a talk in person earlier today about how like, monopolies monopolies signal the decline of individualism and individual choice, and proponents of options and individualism should be proponents of monopolies being broken up and consumers having choice. But that's a whole nother podcast and a topic I'm not an expert in. Sound and Pound, Drake and Ghost said that it would make the product worse because an even diluted, more diluted product would be even more diluted. I'm assuming you're talking, staying the broadcast deal. So if it would be more diluted if they stay on ESPN. Absolutely. And I mean, perfect timing, just going back to what I said seconds ago. Staying in one place, definitely. The deal that UFC has with ESPN does not result in the best possible product for the fans. Like if ESPN just says, "Hey, we'll offer you 150% of what we paid you last time for the exact same deal," and the UFC says done, that's not good for UFC fans. What is good for UFC fans, again, competition, breaking it up, UFC trying to please multiple partners for sure. What makes an ambassador of the sport of MMA? I asked a few Whaley haters why they don't think that she's an ambassador. She said she's all strength, no technique, and no beauty. Well, those are people that you should not engage in conversation with and block. Champions should be both beautiful and technical. Do we say that about men? We don't say that about men. So that feels kind of sexist to me. What's a good ambassador if she's not it? I would say people of good character that can bring in a broader audience, acting in a professional. So George St. Pierre was the textbook ambassador. So professional, brings in more fans to the sport. I would say generally of good character, which kind of ties to like they carry themselves in a professional professional way, but they don't have to be the number one best fighter in the world. It helps, but you can be a good ambassador. You can bring more fans into the sport while not being the best in the world. So I really actually do think that Michelle Waterson probably brought more fans into the world. Like think about where UFC was at the time. She like broke in, aside from just like more male fans who thought she was attractive and had a fun fighting style. Like she spoke like she was a mother, and she is a mother, and kind of represented something different that the UFC hadn't really had up to that point. And George St. Pierre was such a professional, clean-cut athlete that UFC hadn't necessarily had at that point, not to mention breaking into the Canadian market as well. So that's why he was a good ambassador. I mean, think about the word ambassador. An ambassador is a connector between two different parties. So, you could say Conor McGregor was a good ambassador, and in a lot of ways he was, but maybe didn't represent that. I mean, the professionalism that he wasn't the clean cut professional guy, but he produced a lot of really memorable moments. Definitely brought in a lot more fans, maybe more than anybody else. How do you spell Fediverse? And yeah, I'm going to hop off in just a second here. How do you spell Fediverse? It like federation. That's where the word comes from, like federation, like parts. FEDI verse, VERSE. Yeah. It's a big thing. If you guys, the guy that I follow, and I'll be honest, I don't really use Threads a whole lot even nowadays, but if you guys are on Threads, follow a guy named Matt Navarra. There's probably a handful of folks that do similar work, but he is just really, if you want to know everything that's going on in the social media world, how things are changing, features, where things are going, news headlines, everything. Matt Navarra, last name is Navarra. He's an excellent journalist that I check in on every couple days and just kind of do a news dump. All things social media. He's the guy. So check it out. He's who I've heard a lot about. He'll share a lot of stuff about the Fediverse. Last question. Whaley has brought more women into the sport, but she's not a good ambassador for MMA, even though she's been promoting MMA in China. No, I would say that she's a good ambassador. I think that she's helped grow the sport in China. And again, like I would say she's a clean cut professional person of good character. Like I think in the exact same way that George St. Pierre was a good ambassador. And folks may not be able to see the same effect that she's having in China that George St. Pierre had in Canada, just because the UFC was smaller back then, and GSP lives in North America. He speaks English, so it's a little bit. I think it's easier for folks to like immediately appreciate that kind of figure than they do what. But I don't think people realize what Weili has really done and built in China for sure. Are there some UFC cards that I should skip? I don't know, man. I honestly feel like there's a pretty good run coming up, and this will be the last question because I got to run. But there's fights on every card coming up that I am interested in. Even the, I mean, we know the main event for every, or we know a lot about the cards except for the December cards and the November 9th show at the Apex. We don't know the main event for that, but the Apex cards coming up are actually pretty strong. There's stuff, even I'm looking at the October 19th card. I mean, there's solid stuff on there. You got Sumo Darji against Charles Johnson. You got Gene Matsumoto against Brad Katona. That'll be good. Rob Font versus Kyler Phillips. Asu Amobayev against Mateos Nicolau. And then Michelle Pajeda against Anthony Hernandez. A lot of good stuff there. I really actually think that every card for the rest of the year is probably worth your time. There you go. But that's up to you. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I got to run, but hopefully we'll get the camera set up better next week. But appreciate all of you. Appreciate your questions. Take care. Be safe this weekend and enjoy UFC Paris. We'll talk to you next time.